The summer sun beat down mercilessly on Oakwood Estates, a neighborhood where manicured lawns and pristine driveways were less a preference and more a religion. Michael Rodriguez stood defiantly beside his midnight blue Jeep Wrangler, his fingers drumming against its dusty hood as he stared down Margaret Thornhill, the self-appointed HOA president everyone knew simply as Karen. It's a violation of Section 4.2 of the Homeowners Association bylaws, Margaret declared, her thin lips pressed into a razor-sharp line. Her designer sunglasses reflected Michael's increasingly irritated expression. Commercial vehicles and oversized personal vehicles are strictly prohibited from being parked in residential driveways. Michael couldn't help but chuckle. A Jeep Wrangler? Commercial? The woman was reaching, and they both knew it. As a decorated Apache helicopter pilot who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, Michael was no stranger to navigating complex terrains, both literal and bureaucratic. He'd navigated through sandstorms, hostile territories, and complex military protocols. Yet somehow, this 5'2" HOA president with her perfectly pressed khaki shorts and matching polo shirt felt like his most formidable challenge yet. "The Jeep is my personal vehicle," Michael responded coolly, crossing his arms. "It's not commercial, and it's not oversized. It's well within standard SUV dimensions." Margaret adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous tell that betrayed her growing frustration. "Appearances matter in Oakwood Estates, Mr. Rodriguez. I can maintain a certain standard here." What she meant, of course, was that they maintained a certain type of aesthetic, one that didn't include a rugged military veteran with a sun-weathered face and a vehicle that looked like it could traverse anything from mountain trails to desert landscapes. Michael knew the real issue wasn't the Jeep. It was him. A Latino veteran who didn't quite fit the neighborhood's unspoken demographic. His home, while immaculately maintained, stood as a subtle rebellion against the cookie-cutter conformity of Oakwood Estates. "I'll give you 3 days to find alternative parking," Margaret continued, her tone brooking no argument. "Either move it or face fines." What Margaret didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that Michael Rodriguez was not a man who responded well to arbitrary ultimatums. His years of military training had taught him something fundamental. Sometimes the most effective response was not confrontation, but creative strategy. As Margaret turned on her designer heels and marched back to her perfectly waxed Mercedes, Michael's mind was already racing. If she wanted to play bureaucratic warfare, she had no idea who she was dealing with. A slight smile played across his lips, the same smile he wore during complex mission briefings when he knew something his adversaries did not. This was far from over. Little did Margaret know, Michael had resources far beyond a typical suburban homeowner, and he was about to demonstrate exactly why you should never underestimate a veteran who knows how to navigate both literal and metaphorical minefields. The battle for Oakwood Estates was just beginning. The next morning, Michael's home office looked more like a military planning room than a typical suburban workspace. Blueprints, local municipal codes, and HOA bylaws were spread across his massive oak desk, each document meticulously annotated with highlighter marks and sticky notes. His wife, Alina, a corporate lawyer with a razor-sharp mind, leaned against the doorframe. "You're going full mission mode again," she said, a mixture of amusement and admiration in her voice. "This isn't just about a parking space," Michael replied, tapping a particular section of the HOA bylaws. "This is about principle." Alina knew that look. It was the same determined expression he wore during his most challenging military missions, the one that said he was about to execute a plan that would catch everyone completely off guard. Michael's military contacts were more than just old friends. They were a network of professionals who had learned to solve complex problems with unconventional solutions. A quick series of encrypted messages that morning had set several wheels in motion. By noon, he consulted with a local zoning lawyer, a former Air Force buddy who specialized in municipal regulations. They discovered a fascinating loophole. While the HOA had strict regulations about ground vehicles, they were surprisingly silent about aerial transportation. His phone buzzed. It was Jack Martinez, a retired helicopter maintenance specialist who now ran a private aviation consulting firm. "I hear you're cooking up something interesting," Jack's text read. Michael's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Remember that Bell 206 you've been trying to sell? I might have a very unique opportunity for you." The pieces were slowly coming together. Margaret Thornhill thought she had backed him into a corner with her HOA regulations. She had no idea what was coming. Elena watched her husband with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Michael," she said carefully, "whatever you're planning, it's going to be spectacular and potentially very expensive." He turned, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Some battles are worth fighting. Some messages are worth sending." By sunset, a series of very specific phone calls had been made. Permits were being reviewed. Consultations were happening. And in a small airfield just outside the city, a certain helicopter was being prepared for a very unusual relocation. Margaret Thornhill had drawn her line in the sand. Michael Rodriguez was about to redraw the entire battlefield. The HOA president believed she had won. She was about to learn the first rule of engagement: never underestimate someone who has been trained to think several moves ahead. The Saturday morning was crisp and clear, perfect for what Michael had planned. Oakwood Estates residents typically spent their weekend mornings manicuring lawns, washing cars, or engaged in passive-aggressive neighborhood surveillance. Today would be different. Jack Martinez's Bell 206 helicopter descended with surgical precision, its rotors cutting through the suburban silence like a precision instrument. Michael had meticulously calculated everything: the approach vector, the landing zone, the maximum permissible noise levels according to local ordinances. Precisely at 9:37 a.m., a helicopter touched down directly on Michael's front lawn. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, coffee mugs frozen halfway to their lips. Old Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down dropped her gardening shears. The Johnson twins stopped mid-skateboard ride, their jaws practically touching the pristine sidewalk. Margaret Thornhill, who had been conducting her weekly neighborhood inspection, nitpicking every minor infraction, stood frozen in absolute shock. The helicopter's landing skids crushed exactly 0 blades of grass. Michael had ensured a perfect touchdown, carefully calculating the weight distribution and ground pressure. As the rotors began to slow, he stepped out, dressed in his crisp military-issue aviator sunglasses and a pressed polo shirt that screamed both "I'm a professional" and "I'm making a point." "Good morning," Michael called out casually, as if parking a helicopter in one's front yard was the most natural thing in the world. Jack Martinez, still in the pilot's seat, gave a professional nod to the gathering crowd. He was enjoying this almost as much as Michael. Margaret recovered first, her face turning a shade of red that would make a fire hydrant look pale. This is impossible," she sputtered, her clipboard trembling in her hand. Michael walked towards her, his stride confident and measured. "Actually," he said, pulling out a thick folder of documents, "it's entirely possible. I've got all the necessary permits. This is my personal transportation vehicle, registered and approved for private use. And interestingly enough, there's nothing in the HOA bylaws that specifically prohibits helicopter parking." The neighborhood stood in stunned silence. Children pressed against windows. Dog walkers stopped mid-stride. The entire street had become an impromptu theater, with Michael Rodriguez as the unexpected lead actor. Elena watched from the front door, a proud smile playing on her lips. She knew her husband well enough to understand this was never just about a parking space. This was about challenging arbitrary rules, about standing up against petty bureaucracy. Margaret's clipboard dropped to the ground. For the first time since anyone could remember, the HOA president was completely speechless. The helicopter gleamed in the morning sunlight, a metallic monument to one veteran's extraordinary way of making a point. The emergency HOA meeting was called within 48 hours of the helicopter incident, as it was now being referred to throughout Oakwood Estates. The community center's largest conference room buzzed with tension, packed with more residents than had ever attended a previous meeting. Michael sat in the front row, calm and collected, with Elena beside him. Margaret Thornhill, looking considerably less pristine than her usual self, stood at the podium. Her perfectly pressed blazer was now rumpled, her hair slightly askew, a visual representation of her unraveling authority. "This is a clear violation of community standards," Margaret proclaimed, her voice rising an octave with each word. "A helicopter cannot be considered a personal vehicle." Jack Martinez, who had been invited as a technical expert, cleared his throat. "Actually, ma'am, absolutely can. The FAA defines personal aircraft quite broadly. Mr. Rodriguez's Bell 206 is fully registered, meets all safety requirements, and is no different from someone owning a personal boat or RV." The room erupted in murmurs. Some residents looked amused, others bewildered. The Rodriguez family had become local legends overnight. Michael's military background had prepared him for this moment. He understood the art of strategic communication, how to dismantle an opponent's argument with surgical precision. When he finally stood to speak, the room went silent. "I've served this country for 15 years, he began, his voice steady and measured. "I've followed rules my entire career, rules that meant life or death. What I won't do is submit to arbitrary regulations that single out specific individuals or make no logical sense." He pulled out a thick binder, dropping it on the table with a resounding thud. "Here are the complete municipal codes, FAA regulations, and local ordinances. I challenge anyone to find a single provision I've violated." Elena leaned in, whispering, "Mic drop moment." The meeting devolved into chaos. Some residents applauded Michael's audacity. Others looked horrified at the potential precedent. Margaret Thornhill looked like she might spontaneously combust. But the most interesting reaction came from unexpected quarters. Old Mr. Simmons, a retired judge who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, began to laugh. A deep, genuine laugh that cut through the tension. "Well played, Rodriguez," he called out. "Well played indeed. As the meeting continued, it became clear that Michael had done more than just challenge a parking restriction. He had exposed the often ridiculous nature of overly restrictive homeowners associations. The helicopter wasn't just a vehicle, it was a statement. Outside, the Bell 206 remained parked on the lawn, a gleaming metal reminder that sometimes the best way to fight bureaucracy is with creativity, preparation, and just a touch of theatrical flair. The neighborhood would never be the same again. 3 months after the infamous helicopter incident, Oakwood Estates had transformed. The HOA bylaws now read like a carefully crafted legal document that balanced community aesthetics with individual rights, a direct result of Michael Rodriguez's creative protest. Margaret Thornhill was no longer the president. In a surprising turn of events, she had been replaced by old Mr. Simmons, the retired judge who had found such amusement in Michael's helicopter demonstration. The neighborhood governance had become more reasonable, more inclusive. Michael's Jeep now sat proudly in the driveway, a symbol of his initial stand against petty bureaucracy. The helicopter, meanwhile, had become something of a neighborhood attraction. Local kids would point and wave when Jack Martinez would occasionally fly by, landing briefly to chat with Michael. Elena had framed the original HOA violation notice alongside a photograph of the helicopter landing. It hung in their home office, a reminder of their most memorable act of civil resistance. At the annual neighborhood barbecue, things were different. Where once there had been tension and unspoken divisions, now there was dialogue. Michael found himself chatting with neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact. The Rodriguez family had become a catalyst for change. "You know," old Mr. Simmons told Michael, clinking their beer bottles together, "sometimes it takes a metaphorical, or in your case, literal, flying machine to help people see reason." Michael laughed. The whole incident had never been about winning or losing. It had been about challenging a system that had grown too comfortable with its own arbitrary rules. He fought not just for himself, but for every homeowner who had ever felt trapped by senseless regulations. The Jeep sat in the driveway. The helicopter occasionally graced the lawn. And Oakwood Estates have learned a valuable lesson about community, respect, and the power of standing up for oneself. As the sun set on another peaceful evening in the neighborhood, Michael Rodriguez smiled. Some battles are won not with confrontation, but with creativity, preparation, and just a touch of aerial audacity. Sometimes, to change the rules, you need to rise above them, quite literally.